Good morning, everybody. Hope you're well this rainy morning. Today, we're going to jump into Ecclesiastes 5 and 6. Um, so, one thing to note right off the bat is I feel like these sections are related in some ways, and maybe we can draw that out in this video. But I do think you can also see two distinct themes. Chapter 5, which is very short, and then chapter 6. We'll pick up. Actually, chapter 5 is not that short, but chapter 6 is going to pick up the theme of money, basically, and what wealth and I guess property and stuff means for your life. So, with that in mind, we'll do the first part of chapter 5, which is verses 1 to 7. Okay, so I opened this section with a question. About silence, what it means for you to be in silence. And I think you'll see this coming Tuesday at 6:33. I'm speaking at 6:33, and what I think this will tie in. So maybe the pump will be primed for this conversation. But what is silence? How do you relate with silence in your life? A lot of people hate silence, and so we fill our life with noise. And there's lots of reasons for that. So read these first 5 verses. And first we'll take a look at verses 1 to 3. Verses 1 to 3, basically they distinguish a foolish worshiper from a wise worshiper. Notice that they're both worshipers, but one is foolish and one is wise. And the real difference between them is one of them is quick with their mouth. They have a lot to say. They're quick to speak. The other one, though, is slow to speak and has few words. And the reason that the wise worshiper is slow to speak is that he has a good perspective. He or she has a good perspective that God is God and they are not. And I think what's important to note here is that when we feel like we just have a lot to say in general, we always feel like we're just talking, maybe we've neglected listening. And I think that's what this is trying to accent here is that the wise worshiper knows that they need, and this is a quote here, those who know God well understand that it is much more important that he address us than we address him. So the question is, what does listening to God look like for you? A lot of us pray, we have a lot to say, but it's very difficult for us to listen. Sometimes our minds are too busy. Sometimes we just don't even think about it. And so then I have a few questions asking about that. Okay, so that's that first little section there. Then focusing in on 4 to 6. You'll notice I've left out 7, and we'll get there. 4 to 6 is going to sound really familiar to what we talked about at 6:33 about oaths and making them and not fulfilling them and things like that. I think the key issue here is integrity. And I'll draw this out at 6:33. Sure, making oaths is in and of itself important, but the issue here is we want to be people who are fully integrated. In other words, we say and do the same thing. We're not duplicitous, right? We're not liars. A lot of us, not a lot of us, maybe some people struggle with really lying, but I think a lot of times we just kind of we aren't who we say we are. We say things to impress people or to look a certain way. And that's a problem. I think that's what this is getting at here, that we want to be one way in our heads, but we really are another way. And I point to this Jeremiah and James section because it points to people, both of them, who are saying one thing with their mouths, but their lives are a completely different way. And what you're going to see as you read, especially in Jeremiah, and maybe in James too, I can't remember, but they both, I think in James too, they talk about oppression of people. And I think what's really interesting is the connection that we see to Ecclesiastes in general, that those who have a lot to say and those who don't listen, it's not just that their lives aren't integrated, maybe they just struggle with personal sin. People who are not in tune with God and who don't have a good perspective of him are inevitably going to neglect others because they're so self-centered. They are interested in what they have to say, not in what God has to say. So uh, I hope that this passage will help you reflect on yourself. It has for me. I'm so talkative. These videos are so long. so, um, yeah, this is a theme throughout the Bible, and there was a lot more we could say here, but that's that's um, that's the gist. And verse 7 is kind of the therefore there. Therefore, stand in awe of God, and that's the key. Are you in awe of God, or is he just kind of like, oh yeah, God, yeah, I know about him, or like, yeah, I got good theology, but like, what does it look like to really stand in awe of God? What about God makes you stand in awe? Okay. The next section, so that's that. That's 1 to 5. The next section, we're going to tackle all the rest of chapter 5 and all of chapter 6 because I think they have a common goal having to do with possessions and finances. So again, I have a question up front to get people thinking. This is a little bit similar to last week about the future goals, but this is focused specifically on money. And maybe people the previous week said, when they talk about future goals, said money too. But do you have financial goals, and what are they? Just get people thinking about this idea. So let me get to the right page. Okay, so the first section to look at is verse 8 to 13. And a quick note here, if you look down in the notes section, I explain why I've broken it up this way. I'm following my commentator here, my friend Ian Proven. It's going to read a little bit awkward because verse 13 and 14 read as one sentence in the English. So if you want to go all the way through 14 and then you want to do 13 to 20, that's fine too. However you need to break it up to make it read kind of smooth in English is fine. But what I want to recognize is that I think 8 to 13 is one idea, and then 14 to especially 17 is another idea, and then 18 to 20 is kind of like the so what of of chapter 5. Hope that makes sense. Okay, verses 8 to 9 starts with a really interesting idea. It's saying we should not be surprised to see oppression. And the reason is that there's someone in charge and someone is in charge of them. And the idea here is that there's this inevitable danger in human rulers, in government, because people in power are prone to act in their own interest. And even if that's not true, people in power usually have a superior, almost everyone has a superior that they have to answer to and act in their own interest. And what I'm saying here is this is not a political statement. I am not saying, so therefore, the Republican Party is that's not the point of this. This is actually, getting this right from the text. And I point you to 1 Samuel, where the people of Israel, God had been their king. They had no ruler. They had some prophets. And then eventually they say, hey, we want a king like other people. And God says, okay, but look at what happens when you have a king. These are the things that will happen. And even with a good king, like David, Saul wasn't a super good king, but David, it's inevitable that humans who are in charge, look at the Bathsheba Uriah incident. There will be some sense of wickedness just because people are broken. So again, please try to quell arguments about, this is why, a Republican, Democrat. That is not the point. The point here, I think, is like, okay, given this idea that government is limited in what it can do, you can't legislate morality. What is our role in the world where we live? So that's a long explanation for that, but I wanted you to understand where I was coming from there. I'm not making a political statement, just following what the text has to say. So he goes on there to unpack that, what's going on in the hearts of these rulers and of men in general. And that is that wealth does not just come to the cost of others, it comes to the cost of yourself. Because look at 10 especially. It says, where does it say? Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied. It's this idea, we have this idea in our heads, like if I just get to a certain point, like if I could just buy a house, or if I could just have this much money, or if I could have a retirement plan, then I'll just be comfortable. I won't have to worry anymore. Once I reach this point, that point will never come. You will never be there. Just look at the wealthiest people in society who are just never satisfied. There's always something more to be had. It's not money, it's something else. Um, Anything outside of God cannot satisfy you. And so I have some questions reflecting on that. Okay, so then looking at 14 to 20, the idea here uh, is someone who has experienced some kind of unexpected loss. And it's not really clear what that is, but it has to do with like an inheritance in this situation. But the idea in general is um, in your life, you will experience some kind of loss at some point, very likely, for reasons that are just kind of unknown to you, or maybe that you couldn't have seen or that you couldn't have controlled. Um, so I think everyone has experienced this, at least on some level. I know I certainly have. And James, I have a lot of New Testament references coming up, but James is going to point us to this idea that our life is fleeting and fragile. And this should really move us to to humility before God, and also just a simple enjoyment of what we have before us. That's kind of one of the big points of Ecclesiastes. Rather than trying to manipulate life or see it as an end, a means to an end, um, we should enjoy life as it's given to us. So, what does it mean? This is a big question here. I think, what does it mean to make plans in light of these things? It is not bad to make plans. We're called to be stewards of what God has given us. But what does it mean to both make a plan and to hold it loosely? And I think that's one thing I try to, the way I talk about it is like you make a plan, but you kind of hold it like this, with open hands, saying like, "This is what I've got. God, I'm gonna make my plans and say, Your will be done," kind of thing. Not become too invested in them, but only be invested that I know God and that He loves me. Okay, so moving on to chapter 6. I'm skipping some things here because there's some repeated themes, but yeah. Moving on to chapter 6, I take it in two hunks. I do 1 to 6 and 7 to 12. 1 to 6 is, I gotta remind myself here. Right. Okay, so it's talking about a man who is a similar theme, who has a lot. So in the Old Testament, children, lots of children, and long life, those are big markings of blessings. You're like, really, lots of children? Yes, lots of children. These are markers of a blessing, of God's blessing. The point here is that we're trying to look at a man who, the idea is like, this is the epitome of what you could have on earth. I know this might sound ridiculous in our modern day, but this is like supposed to be like, look, this guy's got it all. He's been blessed. You can think of someone in your life like, man, this person's been blessed. They've got it all. But look, he cannot enjoy that blessing because he's always wanting more. So that's the answer to that first question. And I think that we do this all the time. I do this a lot. Is instead of stopping to enjoy these good things God has given us, we're working to either preserve them or to get more or to make sure those things are taken care of. It's hell, right? We work, work, and yet we don't enjoy the things that God has given us. This challenges me a lot. So what's the balance here? I'm being a good steward and enjoying those blessings. Next, the next little set of verses is basically a recap. I like this quote here: "Human beings prefer to make a name for themselves, but in fact, they already profess one or possess one." We are tempted to make a name for ourselves. I want to be a great engineer, or I want to be a super smart theology guy, or want to be a family person, or whatever. But your name is. But I think it's notable to say that God has given you a name. You are His child, and as such, He's named you. And that means something. That name should be above all the other names that we're trying to gain for ourselves. So with all that in mind, I have a little bit of a wrap up here. And I point to a couple New Testament passages that speak to the dangers of money, and talk about how difficult it is to seek wealth and seek Christ. Man cannot serve two masters. So I think what happens is we read verses like this and we say, well, money is the root of all evil. It's not evil. It's okay to have money, stuff like that. Or like for the rich young ruler passage in Matthew 19, we'd be like, well, that was just for him. Jesus didn't say that to everybody. That's fine. That's true to a point. But I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to find excuses for ourselves to seek after wealth. Um, we're trying to be like, well, it's okay for them, but it's not fine for me. I'm not going to fall. I'm not going to fall prey to the dangers of money. That's not a great way to think about things. The Bible is clearly and repeatedly warning us against this type of thinking. Um, so, thinking back to the beginning, thinking about your financial goals, how does this challenge us when we think about our financial goals? And for those who end up having above average income, maybe you're going to be a rock star engineer. You're going to get us to like live on Jupiter or something. I don't know, like aerospace people. I don't know. Aerospace people are like not possible. It's a gas giant. I'm sorry. I've been reading space books. If you have an above average income, if you're a genius like that or something, what are some options for you? I think you should really think about what it looks like um, to give and to support people around you, to love your neighbor. I think there's this fallacy that we always need to live at the income level that we can gain. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that we can say, like, this is the income level I'm going to live at, and the rest of it is abundance for something else, not necessarily for my comfort. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to close with here is this Deuteronomy passage. When Israel went to the promised land, was about to go into the promised land, they were about to kind of have all they wanted, right? They were about to have abundance. God gives them a warning, and he basically says, look, you're going to go in there, you're going to have what you want, and the temptation for you is going to be like, look what I did. I traveled across the desert. I beat all these armies. I made this life. And man, if that isn't the American mindset, I don't know what is. We have to keep in mind that even if you're smart, even if you're whatever, you worked hard. We are not self-made. No one is self-made. We must remember that God is the giver of all things. We got to remember, like the one out of the 10 lepers in the New Testament that turned and thanked the Lord. It was him that pleased God. So I have a couple challenges for you, hoping that kind of helps guide you in some directions. I've been getting some really great questions from everyone, so please keep those coming. And also just know that next week, Jacob Kramer is writing the Bible study. I don't know if he's going to make you a video yet, but I think we should peer pressure him into doing that. So I'll talk to you soon. Yeah, bye.